On the morning of July 14th, 1793, deep in the dank cells of Paris's conciergerie, a 24-year-old woman named Charlotte Corday woke up with her hands chained and her dress stiff with dried blood. It wasn't her blood. It belonged to Jean-Paul Marat, the man she had stabbed to death 3 days earlier with an ordinary kitchen knife she'd bought at the market. The air in her cell reeked of wet stone, waste, and the kind of fear that accumulates when hundreds of people have sat in the same darkness, waiting for the same blade. But Charlotte didn't shake. Not yet. People like to say the body never lies, and Charlotte's body, after 72 hours in the hands of the revolution, was already telling a story the official records would never bother to tell. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where the chains had been tightened too hard, especially at night, on purpose so she couldn't sleep. Her face, once calm and pale like a saint painted in a Norman chapel, carried fresh bruises along her jaw and cheekbones. Her hair, which she had worn pinned up with the neat grace of a well-educated aristocrat, now hung loose and tangled, torn in patches by hands that weren't hunting for truth, just humiliation. To understand how she ended up in that cell, you have to go back to the afternoon of July 13th. When Charlotte knocked on the door of Marat's apartment on the Rue des Cordeliers, she carried a forged letter, a modest green dress, and a resolve most people, men or women of that era, never had to test in themselves. Marat was in his copper bath as always, half submerged in water that soothed his diseased skin. Bandages soaked in vinegar wrapped his body, and the room carried that sour, medicinal smell that always clung to him. He agreed to see her for a simple reason. She was a young woman. She looked harmless, and Marat's vanity could not imagine anyone seeing him as a monster fit to die. Charlotte waited until he leaned forward to read the list of traitors she'd handed him. In that exact second, she slipped the knife from the folds of her bodice and drove it into his chest with such force the blade pierced his lung and grazed his heart. One clean, surgical thrust. Final. Marat screamed for help. His lover, his friends, anyone, then collapsed into the bathwater, which turned red almost instantly. Charlotte didn't run. She stood there, the knife still in her hand, almost calm, almost formal, like someone waiting for a carriage after finishing a morning errand. She believed the mission was complete. France was rid of one of its bloodiest executioners. What she didn't understand yet was that her own suffering was only beginning. The arrest was immediate. Marat's lover, Simone Evrard, flew at her, scratching, shrieking, trying to tear her apart right there. Neighbors poured into the room, swinging fists, grabbing whatever they could, beating Charlotte until the National Guards forced their way in and pulled her free. Not out of mercy, out of strategy. The Committee of Public Safety wanted her alive long enough to make a spectacle of her. They dragged her through Paris while the crowd spit on her, hurled stones, screamed that she was a royalist assassin, an aristocratic snake, a whore of the Girondins. Charlotte walked with her head up anyway, refusing to cry, refusing to give them the pleasure of seeing her fold. But inside the conciergerie, beyond the reach of the public eye, the real punishment began. Her first interrogation was led by Jacques-Claude Bernard, the Paris Commune's prosecutor, a man who had sent people to the guillotine with the bored efficiency of signing receipts. Bernard wasn't after a confession. Charlotte had already admitted to the killing, and she did it without flinching. What Bernard wanted was to strip her story away, to turn her from a tragic heroine into a puppet. If they could paint her as part of a greater royalist conspiracy, they could justify more executions, more purges, more terror. The sessions lasted for hours, Charlotte was forced to stand the whole time while Bernard and other officials fired questions at her about plots that didn't exist. Who sent you? How much did the Girondins pay? What other attacks are planned? She answered with a clarity that infuriated them. No one sent me. I decided alone. I killed one man to save 100,000. That line, so simple, so devastating, sealed her fate in ways she couldn't yet see. Between interrogations, she was thrown back into her cell, but the revolution had perfected punishments that didn't leave official marks. Guards were ordered to wake her every hour by slamming clubs against the bars, shouting obscenities, and whispering threats of rape they never carried out, but always kept alive in the air like poison. Her food was deliberately rotten: moldy bread, cloudy water, insects floating on top. This wasn't neglect, it was policy. They wanted her to reach the guillotine weak, terrified, repentant. Charlotte refused to break. On the second day, they brought in Jean-Jacques Hauer, the revolution's official painter, to sketch her portrait before execution. It was a common practice: capture the enemies of the people for history, like trophies. Hauer expected a shattered woman, but when he saw Charlotte, face bruised, hair filthy, wrists torn, he stopped short. There was something almost unsettling about her composure. She sat for him without complaint, holding herself with the same trained dignity she had learned in the convent at Caen. He worked for hours, and during that time he spoke with her. "Why did you do it?" he asked. Charlotte met his eyes without blinking. "Why did he kill every day with his poisoned pen?" "I killed once to stop him." Hauer didn't answer, but his brush did. In his portrait, he captured something the committee never wanted the world to see: dignity. Years later, that image would become a symbol of resistance to tyranny, exactly what the revolution feared most. The third day, July 16th, was the worst. An official visit from the coroner was ordered by the committee, not to ensure her health, but to humiliate her in a way the paperwork could quietly erase. The doctor was Pierre Sue, and he performed what was labeled a full examination of her body, supposedly to record any signs of poisoning or outside influence. In reality, it was a violation dressed up as law. Charlotte was forced to undress in front of 3 men: Sue, a clerk, and a guard. Sue inspected her with a coldness that turned her body into an inventory. His notes were clinical, almost bored. Female subject, age 24. Height approximately 1.65 meters. Strong build. Recent violence visible on wrists, jaw, ribs. But what he was really searching for was something else. Something he did not find. The revolution wanted proof that Charlotte was immoral, an agent of corruption, a royalist prostitute whose crime was an extension of sexual depravity. The fact that Sue confirmed she was a virgin blew a hole straight through that narrative. So the committee ordered that detail deleted from the final report. The story was already written, and facts were only useful if they helped the script. Charlotte Corday would be remembered as a tool of corrupt men, not as the autonomous, lethal woman she truly was. That night, alone in her cell, she finally cried. Not because she feared death, but because she knew her sacrifice would be twisted, misread, and buried. She had killed a monster. But the monsters who remained were the ones who controlled the story. The morning of July 17th arrived heavy with heat. Before dawn, she was hauled from her cell into a trimming room where her hair was hacked off without care. When scissors snagged in knots, they yanked. Strands fell to the floor like torn flags. They ripped away her bodice, leaving her shoulders and neck exposed for the guillotine. It was the last stripping away of personhood, the final transformation from human being into object. They threw her into a wooden cart, the same kind